every single time humanity went through a disruption period, it usually resulted in wars, in pain, in fear, I think if we don't do anything, we're gonna see the same again. We're gonna completely replace it with the combination of AI and robots. In 5 years from now, it's gonna be already in full swing.
What advice would you give to a 13, 14-year-old now about how to prepare themselves for their future, for their adulthood?
Stop thinking in terms of jobs, because most likely till that kid is working, there is no work anymore.
Christian Angermayer is a visionary entrepreneur and investor with a portfolio spanning biotech, crypto, and frontier tech. He's on a mission to redefine the limits of human potential.
How do you balance the fact that you believe in life after death with this idea of living longer and more abundantly?
Why does it have to be 80, 90, 100 years? Why can't I go on as long as I please? Fear is the mind killer. It really brings out the worst in us. And then also everything sort of around that fear and that change. So long story short, I think
the future looks amazing, but also a little scary. If you, just like me, want to have an honest outlook of what the next chapter could look like and how best to prepare for that, I ask for one simple favor: subscribe, so I can invite the brightest minds on this podcast and get those answers for both you and I. Enjoy the episode.
When and how did you give yourself permission to dream, given that you were raised in a small Bavarian village?
That is an interesting question. What do you mean with permission to dream?
Germany is not the place that I think of when I think of contrarian thinking, when I think of out-of-the-box thinking. And so you did something pretty differently in starting companies, first of all, biotech startups in the psychedelic space, and then what you've done since in crypto, in brain-computer interfaces, you've been a contrarian.
Okay, well, this was like later, like in sort of the business career, but I think I was always like that. So I don't know if there is like, if I ever was sitting there and gave myself permission. That's why I think it was just like that, and I never thought it's different. It's the same like I just later figured out that sort of other people are not always happy, and it was very puzzling for me because like since I'm a child, I'm always very happy. It doesn't mean I have bad days, but like I think I have these baseline sort of happiness, and just figured out later, like sort of in my teens and later on, that other people are not like that or have more like sort of or issues with the happiness. And I would say the same with if you want to say like dreaming big or whatever. I always thought that's how life is. Yeah, I think it's my parents. I came from a very, very I was a normal, very basic in a good meaning upbringing. Like I grew up in this 100 people village. Like most of the other families were farmers, so I was playing outside winter, summer all the time with the other kids. Like my mother was a secretary, my father an engineer. Now they both retired, but luckily still alive. But I think my parents were always like telling me, you can be whoever you are, whatever you are, like very like encouraging. Sometimes they now make the joke that they created a little monster because like already like when I then grew up in my teens, I was so not what the rest of the family and the village is, because like I always was very entrepreneurial, like always wanted to build businesses and whatever. But again, I think it's sort of their encouragement, like already in very early days, that do whatever you want, think whatever you want, whatever.
But like you were, again, a small village in Bavaria. How many people have had the success that you've had? So there must have been, was there any point in your kind of teenagehood or throughout your 20s that you thought there's going to be a ceiling here, there's going to be a glass ceiling? Or were you just, no, I didn't. Yeah.
I was always very like, maybe the one, and I'm just thinking which age it was. I think it was 12 or 13, round about that, when I was the first time in the big city, which was Munich, which is like 2 hours away from where I grew up. And back then, real books were still a thing, and there was a very famous bookshop in Munich called Hugendubel. I think it's still around though. And I went into it, and there was this whole wall of the book Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill. And again, and I already since I can think, so since I'm 6 or whatever, I already was into business. Like everything I did in sort of, how I say in English, primary school was always like, oh, how can I make a business out of it? I loved gardening. So I started selling flowers. Like I loved eggs. But then I went into these Hugendubel bookstore, which again, it must have been I was 12 or 13, and I saw these Think and Grow Rich. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. Like, this was like, this I remember, if this is maybe the one point, again, it was not the point where I gave myself permission, but the one point where sort of I stumbled into a book, which then I read and read again and read again. Like, and I would tell every entrepreneur, that's the one book you should read like once a year. It's very simple, but in its simplicity, I think it contains everything an entrepreneur needs to know. And that was then kind of driving my philosophy further. I think it fell on very fertile ground because, again, like, you know, sometimes when you read something and then it sort of summarizes what you think anyway, just in a very obviously perfect or in a very elaborate way. So in everything I was reading in that book was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I think and how I think life works and whatever. Yeah. So if then it was this one pivotal moment.
And then why psychedelics? Was there a moment that you said, I'm all in on this?
No, that's okay. Now we're jumping from 12 to...
You weren't doing psychedelics at 12?
No, psychedelics came later. I'm just calculating. So it was 2013. So I was 35. Yeah. So fairly late in my life. And as I said before in many podcasts, I didn't do anything before. Like, neither did I try alcohol nor any other drug. So it was a very unlikely candidate for psychedelics. And by the way, like most things in my life, what I believe, again, coming back to the book, Think and Grow Rich, is like, if you go through your life, like with open eyes and open heart, you kind of encounter all these sort of possibilities and then you just need to grab them. So, and literally we could go through everything I ever did. It was not that I sort of kind of meticulously planned that. It was like, I kind of in a very positive and, let's say, practically structured way, because like I believe in that, I sort of was stumbling into all these opportunities and they just presented themselves. And then I was like, oh yeah. So, and psychedelics was very similar. So if you would have asked me literally some days before, like 2013, I would have said I will never try anything, because that was sort of my big thing was like, I don't want to take anything which goes into my brain, for the very simple reason I realized when I was around 15, 14, which is the time when people start drinking in the area I come from, very heavily drinking in this age, which is not good, which is actually the worst. So, but I was like, I realized really like, oh, I'm sort of have this baseline happiness and I'm also not dumb. So I was very, very good in school and I was very, very proud of that. And I was very good in school very easily. So I didn't need to do a lot for it. So practically I concluded for myself, okay, something is very right up here. So why should I jinx it? So there was not even a bigger thought. It was really that. It was like, hey, I don't want to put anything in my brain which could ruin that perfect equilibrium. And then out of that became a thing. Like, and I didn't do anything. I mean, I started drinking coffee when I was 30. Yeah, that was kind of the first, if you want to call it a drug. So, and then very, very randomly at a birthday party in Germany, the birthday person made a joke, which rarely happens because people are kind of know that I don't drink alcohol, and they also know that I don't like to be pushed. I hate that because I think that's one of the worst things in our society, that we're so encouraging for a very, 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 very toxic drug. Anyway, but in this case, I was lucky that the birthday boy did it, because he was like, by the way, one of the other guests is a very famous neuroscientist, and I seated you next to him, and he can tell you that you could drink a glass of champagne with me on my birthday and you wouldn't die. And I was like, heard that before. And I know, obviously, we do a lot of biotech. Yeah, that I'm not dying. I'm not an idiot. But I don't want to do it, because like the very bad thing in our society is if you drink one time, then everybody will like, oh, you did it last weekend, you can do it now. So it's more like the only way, unfortunately, to really not drink in our society is to never drink. So don't allow people to push you into that. Anyway, but I was like, oh, but I'm happy to sit next to a very famous neuroscientist. Maybe I learned something. So I sat down and sort of I asked the guy, I said, look, let's go, if you want to talk about drugs, let's go through all the drugs, legal, illegal, whatever. And I want to know, what are they doing in my brain and what is the downside? And he, by the way, then surprisingly, pulled out a chart, which I'm now at every podcast asking people, if you take one thing away in this podcast, it should be this. So he pulled out the chart of David Nutt, who had written a whole book about it, but the chart sort of summarizes the book, and which practically very accurately analyzed the downside of all recreational drugs, legal and illegal. And the surprising thing is, for many, is that alcohol, in a very scientific observation or study, is the number one most risky drug of all, closely followed by heroin, which people normally would guess is the most dangerous or most toxic or most bad one. And then at the sort of left of the chart, if people Google it now, comes everything which is really bad, like crack, cocaine, whatever. But then on the very right, with practically zero risk, come all the psychedelics. And he was like, look, so we talked the whole evening about every single one of the drugs. But at the end of the evening, he was like, look at the right, like they are, on the very right is mushrooms, like that's what you should actually try. So now people might think, oh, this is like, now we're talking on a podcast about psychedelics. But back then, psychedelics were really seen like a Schedule 1. Like it's unbelievable how much the world has changed since that dinner, partially also because of the work we were then later doing. Because back then I was like, holy shit, no, go away. This is a Schedule 1 drug. You go to jail. This is bad. And I was like, but look at it. Factually, it's not. And then he told me his story. So he was one of the last scientists who still were working with psychedelics. But back then it was a career killer. Now it's a career booster and whatever. And I'm just thinking, but he's still working he's the head of university, but like, not saying his name now, but thank you for the thing. But like, he offered me and said, hey, you should come to my lab and like, we should try it out. And I was like, you're crazy. And then he was like, but it makes you happy. And I was like, but I am happy. Like, why should I do it? And then he started me, that was it, by the way. And then he started me sending studies, whatever, his own ones, but out of the 60s and 50s, showing what he told me, that psychedelics have in generally a very, very, very low risk profile, but have this tremendous potential upside to cure depression, anxiety, addiction, which was completely forgotten at the time. Now people might say, oh, he's stating the obvious, but like, again, back then, 2013, it was like unheard of. Nobody was talking about it. And then I was reading it because in a Pyron in my family office, we do a lot of biotech, but I still was like, why should I do it? Like, I am happy. And then 1 year later, sorry for the long story, but like 1 year later, I was in the Caribbean with very close friends. They had real mushrooms, which they had grown themselves. I trusted them. And they were like, oh, by the way, we're out tomorrow doing mushrooms on the beach. We know you're not going to do it. Just want to tell you, like, we're not available in the afternoon. And I was like, something was there. Very hard to describe. It's like this one feeling, this one where I was like, you guys, what? I want to do it as well. And they went, what? Like, I was like, yeah, something tells me I should try it. So, and this is how in 2014, I did the first time, if you want to call it, like recreational drugs, mushrooms. And it was hands down the single most important, moving, deepest thing I've ever done, which a lot of people would say as well. But I came out of it, and because I'm in biotech and because I'm very entrepreneurial, I was like, holy shit, if it's doing this amount or giving this amount of positivity to me as a happy, healthy person, I can totally see what the studies said, which I had read before, that it's sort of helping and potentially even curing all these mental health issues. And then I was actually already starting thinking, oh my God, like, because that's my nature. That's what I did with everything in my life, which I encountered positively. How can I make a business out of it? And there was sort of the beginning of the thought process to at the end then, or which culminated then in 2017 when starting Atai in Compass.
How much of the journey to 2014 or the lack of psychedelics was driven by your fear and lack of trust in self?
Zero?
Okay.
Well, I don't even understand the question. No, I have a lot of trust in myself. I care myself a lot.
No, of course, but when I think it was more around like when you were saying about when you're observing, my life is so great right now. Like I fear the thought of maybe losing that or losing control of what I have.
So you mean like, do you mean like why I didn't do psychedelics earlier? Or
yeah. Was it down to fear? Do you think, can you reflect now and think?
No, because like I hadn't heard of psychedelics before. Like
it wasn't any like kind of, and you were clearly so intelligent and you had your life so sorted.
I wasn't so, no. So Okay, now I get the question. So you see, I don't even get negative questions because one of my basic rules in life is that everything is great.
Yeah.
But I deeply believe in that. And if things seemingly are not great, because I'm not an idiot, like it's like I'm not like I'm ignoring everything. Like life has hard moments. But what I learned and observed, and so when applying my philosophy, I deeply believe that life is inherently great. I also believe inherently people are good. And if you go through life with sort of that positivity, I'm also deeply believe in the spiritual side of it and the law of attraction and everything. But even if you leave that aside, I think you can. This is, by the way, this is the great thing of that book, Think and Grow Rich. It doesn't go into the spiritual side of it. There is in the beginning of the book, the author is saying that he's just observing certain kind of rules. Yeah, which one is that what people simplified would call positive thinking. And he's like, look, there are other books and maybe other people who more want to explain why that works.
Yeah.
But he's like, that's not what he wanted to do in the book. And Napoleon Hill is the author. He just says, look, I'm observing that sort of rules and characteristics or rules and that how life works, which I think is great because that's why you can always give it to people. And even if people are like not very like spiritual or open for that, they kind of take it and say, oh yeah, it's a very practical book, while sort of other books like The Law of Attraction, whatever, go a little bit more into also the spiritual explanation why that stuff works. But in general, so what I say is like I deeply believe that life is great. Yeah, people are great. And if you go with that sort of open attitude, you normally should have just positive experiences. So we do have negative experiences, all of us, regularly, because that's part of life. But if I zoom out and look at my last 47 years, then I can say that all of the negative experiences I had, for example, in business or with people, they actually, because I still had the attitude, okay, there must be something positive in it. Yeah, they actually laid the ground then for very positive things in the future. Yeah, while I think if you have this negativity and if you look at life very negatively, then they break you because then you just think you get confirmed in your negative bias. Well, I'm like, yeah, I know what already some people were saying. They're like, okay, he's successful and he sits there and he has a podcast in a nice apartment and whatever. But there were moments in life which were really hard. And in the moments, it was very hard for me to stick sort of to the philosophy, but I tried to. I really told myself, look, by the way, that's normally when it's a real test for your life philosophy is when things then get really hard, because like it's very easy to say what I just said when things go really well. Yeah. But what I can tell now, if I would make an interim analysis of like my last 47 years, I would say all the stuff which seemed to be bad in the first place actually turned out to be something really, really positive. You just needed sometimes years and sort of zoom out to realize that. I also believe there are things which are so in the first instance negative. For example, if somebody dies, there is nothing good in it. But I do think we will, that's my personal belief, in a very big zoom out, meaning when we die and when we look back then on our life, we're going to realize what was the lesson we were supposed to learn in that moment. So I think there are actually sort of bad events in life which will not materialize in anything good in this life, but you're still going to somewhere realize why they were actually very loving and good for you, if that makes sense.
100%. I've gone through some like big knocks, and I think I came at it from a slightly different angle from you. I think in the moment, unfortunately, especially in my 20s, I had more of a victim mindset. And now, as I've come into, I know, and it's like you reflect on it and you're like, wow, for so long I was in this like negative spiral. But the second you can reshape it and reform that narrative in your head and start thinking abundantly, I've now reflected on all these moments as beautiful initiations, and I'm so grateful for them. And it's just, I have to thank also psychedelics for that, plant medicine, San Pedro and psilocybin, for giving me that perspective, being the kind of deep personal insight on my shoulder that I really needed as well.
But I think you're very lucky, because I think the worst, if you want to call it like that, the woke mind virus did to a whole generation is that victim mindset, because it kind of sort of really condemns you if you're not escaping from it, I believe, because I think the worst you can do to yourself is to see you as a victim and always in this negativity, and it condemns you to a very, very, very sad and bad life. And I think we're facing a whole generation where at least the majority or a lot of the young people out of that generation grew up with that victim mentality. And I think it will really haunt them unless they kind of break free for the rest of their life.
If you were like advising, let's say Philip, your cousin who I just met beforehand, one of his friends who might have got themselves into that sort of mindset, is there anything that you would say to them?
Well, I would say like read things like How to Change Your Mind on the psychedelic side, like Think and Grow Rich. I think the Law of Attraction is a great book. I think the problem is it's a little bit chicken egg. You need to have that impetus first. Like, and if you're in this victim mindset, that's why it's so toxic. It's like one of the things is that you don't think it's changeable because you're the victim. It's like it takes really away all the agency you might otherwise have, and that is the problem. So and I would say, like, hopefully if somebody sees this podcast who has a victim mindset, then yes, try to read these books, whatever, but they're not starting watching the podcast because, again, this philosophy, this woke mindset took away all the agency of a whole generation. Yeah.
And sometimes it's so deeply ingrained. So thinking about neuroplasticity, sometimes you don't even realize you have that sort of mindset. It's so embedded and you're so clouded. And so for me, again, just thinking back to San Pedro and another mescaline and psilocybin, but it was able to give me that perspective that I think would have taken much longer if I just leaned on meditation or yoga.
That's maybe the good thing. I think while we have a whole generation which is or at least where a lot of people have this victim mindset, I think it's also a generation which is embracing psychedelics. So that's maybe one way out, or one solution for it, hopefully.
You were saying before that when you reflect on your life at the end of it, I know with
it's not the end of my life yet. If we do like an interim analysis.
Do you believe in life after death?
100%.
Okay.
So, no question.
Let's move. I really want to ask a few more questions on psychedelics and then go into the longevity movement, which I'm deep into. The space is obviously, it's come leaps and bounds, and it's really exciting what's going on, especially in the US. What do you think is holding it back right now when you think about Atai and a lot of the investments that you've made?
So I actually think the psychedelic space is not going not well at all, or positively said, it's going really well. But I know where your question is coming from. Sort of, if you look at the share prices, for example, of Atai and Compass, the two companies, psychedelic companies I founded, they are kind of at all-time low. But the reason is that the biotech industry as a whole has nothing to do with psychedelics, is in a very, very bad shape, at least on the stock market. I don't think the companies, it's very important, the companies are not in a bad shape. It's really like the state of like the capital markets around biotech, which the reason is fairly simple, still very devastating. So biotech stocks are the most interest rate sensitive stocks at all. Why? Because most biotech companies do science, do all the FDA studies, and then when they get an approval, and then they get revenue. So if you look at the way companies are usually valued, like discounted cash flow, you have sort of spending, and in the future, you then have massive cash flows. But because the cash flows are sometimes far, sometimes near, but are in the future, any form or any interest rate change, which then sort of changes the discount rate you're applying, sort of makes biotech stocks especially sensitive, or the valuations, to any change in interest rates. So what was clear when interest rates went up because of inflation, it was clear that biotech stocks had to go down. But not as much as they did by far. But what has happened is, because they came from a generational high after COVID, so we had this boom phase in biotech, and then this shock moment when interest rates shot up, is that there was too much pressure on the system. And actually, what people are not aware of, sort of the specialized buyers base for biotech stock is actually very small. There are maybe some 100 specialized life science funds, while there are thousands and thousands of tech funds. Yeah, and just the pressure on the system was too much. These funds had outflows, whatever. So actually biotech and biotech stocks, listed ones, went into kind of this death spiral. I think we're finding the bottom now. And I personally believe, like sort of not financial advice, but I personally believe that biotech is the last sort of sector which hasn't recovered. If you look at there were other sectors who went through a similar shock. Bitcoin went down to whatever, 16,000, but now it's at 100. And I deeply, deeply believe, simplified said, biotech will have a similar steep rebound, but it's the one sector which hasn't recovered yet from the post-COVID, post-inflation, interest rate spike shock. So, but that is true for all the biotech companies. So if you look at the average small and mid-sized biotech company, it went down 80-90%. So did Atai and so did Compass. But it doesn't say anything about the state of the psychedelic industry, if at all, by the way. And for Atai, I can say it because I'm the chairman. Yeah, obviously it's my company. So with all the disclaimer that I'm super biased and obviously super passionate about my own company, but I think it's one of the biggest investment opportunities out there because we're trading almost at cash. We have 7 late-stage drugs, meaning which are close to approval in mental health. All or most of them are based on our psychedelic drugs, which means, by the way, I think the risk that they're not working is very, very low because we know they're working. We just need to prove it now in a very scientific, very gold standard way, but it's not a novel drug where we could discover it doesn't work. No, we do know psychedelics work. I would dare to say that very bluntly in that way, which for me, again, with all the bias that it's my company, makes Atai one of the most compelling investment opportunities out there. But side note, but again, it's going really, really well.
Yeah. Lars Walder, your co-founder at Atai, was telling me about going deep on psychedelics, but he was also telling me about the success of, is it J&J, who have ketamine process that they were able to...
Yes, that is maybe another... So I think what I just said, like that sort of biotech in general is in a very bad state, is the main reason why, again, why most biotech stocks, in fact, but also and especially Atai and Compass trade so low. Maybe I should add why, because like when an industry like the biotech industry is in such a big distress, then people don't like novelty. So, and I would argue actually now that psychedelics in a certain way are the most risk minimized thing you can buy, because again, I would say we do know scientifically that psychedelics works. And again, there's always an execution risk, by the way. What could happen, which I don't think will happen, but like that my colleagues at Atai, we make mistakes in trial design, whatever. So there is an execution risk. So it's very important to say a drug can work and you still can mess up the execution. But if hopefully people assume now that we don't do that, that we know what we're doing, I think psychedelics in general, and especially Atai and Compass, are very sort of reduced. However, that is not the perception people have at the moment about psychedelics in general, because they think, oh, this is novel and fancy. And in very dire times, people do not like novelty. When things go really well, people love novelty. When sectors go not very well, like biotech at the moment, then people don't like novelty. So that is, I think, the biggest burden. The second big burden on psychedelic stocks is indeed, but I think it's going to turn now and become our biggest driver, is the success Spravato has now, but how long it took to get there. So Spravato, for the ones who don't know, is a product of J&J, and it's actually a novel version of ketamine. And ketamine, or in this case S-ketamine, is a very rapid-acting antidepressant. So it's not, I would not say, I always say this is like, for layman's term, ketamine is a semi-psychedelic. So it doesn't give you that very deep experience. That's why it's a quick fix, but it's not a full fix. So I would always tell people the real deals are all the psychedelics Atai and Compass are developing. But for the sake now, it's close to psychedelic, semi-psychedelic. And unfortunately, at the beginning, J&J or Spravato didn't look like a big success at all. But there was a reason. They were the first one, and I always say pioneers take the arrows, and the settlers take the land. So they had to do all the groundwork with the doctors and the therapists of rolling it out. And then additionally, again, I don't want to criticize J&J at all, but what I know from when I talk to the execs there, they didn't really know what they have. Like in terms of J&J is more like, what are they doing? Like they're doing cancer drugs and all of them. And suddenly in their big portfolio of J&J, they had this one semi-psychedelic, which was a little bit different. And I think they just didn't know how to sort of roll it out, and third, it was a different time. Again, we sitting here now in 2025, people talk about psychedelics in a very open, in a very positive way. I would say psychedelics have arrived now in society and people are eagerly waiting for Atai and Compass to be successful. But in 2019, when I think it was approved 2019, this was not the case. So again, short version, J&J had to do much more groundwork. And I think at the beginning, at least, they didn't really know how to do that. And that made Spravato start really slow. But now the revenues are exploding. And now people are like, yes, now we understand it. Now we understand the true potential of Spravato and of ketamine. And now it's actually more than $1 billion revenue drug, which is called a blockbuster drug, and growing and growing. And I think it's going to be a 5 billion plus revenue drug soon. So investors now think, okay, that's the same what's going to happen to Atai and Compass. They're going to get, by the way, nobody out there I have ever met believes that the psychedelics Atai and Compass are developing will not get approved. Yeah. Every investor I talk to is like, no, you're going to get it to approval. But then look at Spravato. It will take you some years more till you really make big revenues. And I was like, no, because we know how to do that. Also, we learn from the mistakes of Spravato, but even more important, now the therapists out there already know how to use that stuff because they're using Spravato, and we practically going into that sort of, into that infrastructure, which nicely J&J laid out for us. Yeah. So I deeply believe once Compass and then Atai have approved drug, we're going to see they're going to be really multi-bestseller from day one.
So let's zoom out. We're in 2027, 2028. The context of psychedelics at large, rather than just being about Atai and Compass, would I be able to go into a GP in London or in Los Angeles or in Austin and say, I have depressive symptoms? Could I go on a course of MDMA? Is that something
MDMA is not a psychedelic. We can talk about that as well. It's in the same world, but it's not a psychedelic. Okay. Let's stay with psychedelics for now. Yeah. So yes, so I think in 2028, there are gonna be several psychedelics on the market approved so that you can go to a therapist, or psychologist or GP. Again, by the way, we will define together with the FDA for every single psychedelic who can apply it. Is it your GP? Do they need special training, whatever? But yes, so you will be able to go to a healthcare professional. And if there is a reason why you why it's applicable to you, you will be able to get psychedelic therapy. And what I believe, what I want to see the world and what I think the world will be in, I think, 2028, 29 then, when more psychedelics from us. So Atai has, as I said, 7 late-stage drugs in development. I think there will be a whole range of psychedelics therapists and healthcare providers have at their disposal, so they will talk to you. So it's not that you're going to go in and say, hey, I want this. It really depends which kind of mental health problem you have, like depression, anxiety, addiction from other drugs, post-traumatic stress disorder. But then even if we talk about, let's say, depression, it will be that the therapist with you will try at least to find out why are you depressive. And there's different sort of root causes of mental health issues. And then depending what is the sort of judgment of the therapist, they might say, oh, let's try this psychedelic, or let's try this. It's a little bit like, because it's not one, meaning in general, I believe psychedelics always help, but some psychedelics help better for X and others for another sort of issue. So, and what we want to do, I want to give therapists a broad tool set so that they have really all the tools at hand and then can sort of pick the right one for you.
Brilliant. Let's go on to longevity. You're a donor of the X Prize.
Yep.
And I'm in New York for the X Prize Health Span, which was incredible. And we saw an interesting range of semi-finalists being chosen. But I think the arena is much wider and much more diverse and much more extreme, I'd say. You've got some biotech startups that are looking at whole body replacement, and then you've got digital brain emulation and things that are really out there, logging ourselves onto the cloud. When you look at the X Prize, this idea that we're going to be able to extend healthy lifespan by 20 years in the next 5 years, is there a idea, a concept, a startup that you're really excited about, that you're really bullish about?
The thing with aging is, I think there won't be different, for example, in psychedelics, just to make the comparison. In psychedelics, you just have a handful of psychedelics. Yeah. And because I'm very proud about it, because we were the first one to sort of think about bringing back psychedelics medically, a big part of the success of Atai and Compass is that we were able to recreate all the intellectual property around these substances. So we own these substances for the medical use. I always say, people look, if you go to Burning Man or if you do shrooms in your holiday, don't worry, I'm not going to knock on your tent and say, you're going to pay me a royalty fee. But if people do it in a medical setting, by the way, paid by the healthcare provider, then it's going to be our drug because we own the intellectual property, again, around psilocybin, DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, ibogaine, and so on. Longevity is a much more complex, or aging, let's start there, the problem. Aging is a much more complex thing. It's actually, we use the word aging for a wide variety of things which go wrong. So actually, a colleague of mine with whom I started a longevity company, Professor Manuel Serrano, was the one who, and I don't want to say the wrong year, but it was in the early 2010s, I think it was 2010 or whatever, he defined what aging really is, because we use that word very colloquially, and he came up with the concept of the 12 hallmarks of aging. So he defined these 12 sort of, let's call it subcategories of aging, which suddenly, though, were not as esoteric anymore. Before Manuel, there was a lot of people who talk about longevity and defeating aging or curing aging or whatever. It's very esoteric because aging is natural.
Yeah.
And Emmanuel came and said, no. Actually, there are these 12 sort of areas which were with a progressing age, which go really wrong, or where sort of problems occur. And then there's the total amount of these problems. And then the picture that generates, picture meaning what we can see, we get gray hairs, our skin, whatever, everything which we colloquially define as aging is the sum of these 12 problems. But what the great thing was that suddenly even sort of, let's say, conservative or traditional scientists were wait a moment, these 12 hallmarks of aging, they are very scientifically understandable. It's metabolic dysfunctions, stem cell exhaustion, and so on. And so his work sort of made aging more tangible because he defined more what it is. And hence also he allowed us sort of to dream, so to say, and say, oh, maybe if we solve all these 12 problems, which is, by the way, a big thing, then we might stop and reverse aging in itself. So, but what I want to say, it's a really complex system. It's not one. There will never be a single drug and then sort of you turn back aging.
Not a magic pill,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. So there will be. So that's why, again, different than in psychedelics, where to a certain extent I can say Atai and Compass will be the monopolists, for psychedelics. That there cannot be a monopoly in the longevity space because it's such a complex sort of field, but we need many, many, many interventions, which then hopefully all together going to slow down and hopefully someone even reverse aging. And then my and a lot of other people's expectation is when we then get to the point that we push our life expectancy to 100, 110, and 120, then new problems will arise. Problems we don't even know yet because we are not there yet. So I think this will be I think in English you call it the rat race. There will always be new problems, but we're going to solve them. And I think gradually we're going to push life expectancy further and further and further. And I think we are already in a generation where we're going to have a life expectancy of some 100 years. But important when people who watch us now say, oh, well, it's crazy. It's not that we're going to wake up and jump to some 100 years life expectancy. It's going to be that every year we add a little bit. Yeah, and then what Peter Diamandis, who does the X Prize, what he and I believe that somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe earlier 5, we're going to have these one magic year, so to say, where we win statistically more than a year of life expectancy. And from then on, we're winning more than we're losing by the calendar year, which is going by. And from then on, practically, theoretically, this can go on for very long, if that makes sense.
Yeah, longevity, escape velocity.
Yeah.
How do you balance the fact that you believe in life after death with this idea of living longer and more abundantly? And the reason why I ask this question is it's going to become increasingly a hotter debate, right? As we get closer to longevity, escape velocity. I had the Peter episode that dropped last week, and there are many people in the comments section saying, like, why do you want to live forever? It's all these men that always want to do this and play God and all that. And it all, like, is that more of the victim mindset that you talk about? Or
I think that's deeper, actually. I think who really messed it up was Christianity in the medieval ages, because like what happened is Christianity somewhere took the wrong turn, at least as an organized. So again, I'm very spiritual, but like I think all religions are great, but they all kind of turn sour when they become an organized organization, because then they have to abandon their spiritual beliefs, because like in order to become an organization. But very side note, I don't want to always come back to psychedelics, but I think we always coming like by your questions, and I come to the longevity in a second, but like most religions, and a big shout out to Brian Murarescu, so who haven't read his book, The Immortality Key, it's amazing. So Brian did some of those amazing works in really proving that many religions, including Christianity, are based on psychedelic consumption, which, by the way, side note, if we want to go deep, doesn't in any way take away their legitimacy. I think it actually gives them their legitimacy, because I personally believe psychedelics are doorways to the divine. And sort of it makes it for me much more real when I'm like, oh yes, sort of enlightened people who started religions or prophets or whatever, they used psychedelics because actually God wants us to use psychedelics for that, to become closer to him and sort of to learn and then to tell it to others. Because some people you think like religions are like, it's a psychedelic dream. It's not. It's actually, it makes it, for me, the fact, what Brian has proven, that religions are based on psychedelic makes them actually, for me, more like valuable, because I really believe that the people who sort of were teaching us the one or the other religion, they had sort of access to the divine and were bringing it to the people at the time. So, and if you look at, I was, by the way, even before psychedelics, I was always very fascinated with religions, sort of as a construct around sort of our longing for God, or for, let's say, for the divine, because some people might say there are more gods, and I think it's all the same, because if you go into like the core of most religions, they are actually fairly good. Like they say, look, what does Christianity really say? Don't be a dick. Don't be an asshole. Like, be nice to other people. Yeah. See the other person. Treat people like you want to be treated. So if you go through the basic rules all religions tell us, they're actually good. And then what happens is when they become an organization, yeah, and then the people want control. Yeah, and the first thing they're doing, and by the way, they're hardcore evidence out there, that always when religion become an organization, then the people who want to run the organization are like, we cannot have all of our disciples do psychedelics, because you can't control somebody who kind of has a direct line to the boss. Yeah, it's not possible. Like whatever the bishop would have said, like something like ABC, and then maybe one disciple said, but wait a moment, I was actually communicating with God last night in my psychedelic session, and he told me that's all bullshit. Like, you're just doing it to control me. Yeah. So you come to points where if you go, and one of the really like game changing to a negative way for example, in Catholic or Christian history, was the concilium of, I think you say concilium in English, right? The gathering of Nicaea, Deutsch Nicea, and where you can read in the documents, they were kind of declaring all of the more spiritual, all of the sects, but they were not considered sects before. They were very legitimate parts of Christianity. Yeah, they called them heretic, but it was all the ones who used psychedelics and who really told their disciples, no, you don't need people in between. You can communicate with God directly, because who won sort of the the fight for the direction in Christianity were the ones who said we need to build an organization, a power structure, whatever, and we can't have people sort of have too much direct contact with God. And similar things happened with many other religions. So that is one part. And then the second part of Christianity, which was really bad, is that somewhere in the medieval ages, they took that control over people's lives to a new level by saying, look, the world doesn't matter. World is bad, you might suffer, doesn't matter. There is an afterlife, but we control it. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be in the afterlife, we are the ones who control access to it. That's why you pay us now. Yeah, I don't know what the English term is. You could even pay at a certain point to be, there's a term for it in, I don't know the English one, like when you can pay to have your sins forgiven.
Yeah.
But the only way to really have that business model.
Fashion or?
No, like there was the half good part when you could confess yourself and like practically redeem yourself by repent.
Yeah.
But then they said, no, you can also just pay us off. Yeah. What was it called? Like I'm going to find it out and post it in the comments. Like there's this term like where they were selling like literally these certificates. Oh, you paid us $100 and then all your sins are forgiven because it was literally payment for forgiveness. Yeah. But it doesn't just make sense because what does it mean? It meant that all the people who were dreaming of a long life or an eternal life, they were suddenly evil because the church was saying, oh, you want to escape judgment. And escaping judgment, though, meant you want to escape our business model. Yeah. Before, by the way, I want to always remember people about that. Like in throughout the classics period in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, immortality was very tangible, like in mythology, and it was bestowed on the brightest and the smartest and the best. It was a gift from God. So if you go pre-Christianity, being immortal was a symbol for the best. And then when Christianity took over because of the whole control of the afterlife, they suddenly said, no, it's the demons and the vampires. These are the characters who want to be immortal. Immortality is bad. And that is, I think, sorry for the long explanation, but I think because I deeply believe we are a product of the last thousands of years of our own history and of our culture and institutions like the church. And unfortunately, I think sort of that is one of the deep founded roots that instinctively, sadly and wrongly, people are like, oh, why do you want to live forever? Yeah. So first, having said that, we're not going to live forever. Coming to your question, how does it align with my belief in an immortal soul? And by the way, I believe rather in rebirth. We can talk about that in a second, not in one afterlife. Yeah. It's going to come somewhere anyway. So we are so narrow-minded if we think that it's just 80 years. Like, because somewhen we're going to die. There is no way around, statistically. And by the way, if we live thousands of years, somewhen you're going to have an accident, which the best longevity therapy cannot reverse. You want to, whatever you have flying a plane and the plane is whatever, like, and by the way, and if not, somewhen that planet will end. Even if we think that very long, like there is an end to all of it. And then I think it restarts. So for me, it's not even a contradiction. By the way, I also truly believe if we stay human, that's another discussion. If all the stuff we're doing right now with AI, merging ourselves with machines or whatever, but if we stay the same sort of mind as we are now, I think somewhen we want to die because we're going to get curious what's on the other side. And somewhen you might say, you know what, I had now 400 birthdays, 400 Christmases. I'm just done with it. But that, I think, is the ultimate freedom I want to achieve. Why does it have to be 80, 90, 100 years? Why can't I go on as long as I please? But I deeply believe there will be the point where every one of us voluntarily says, you know what, I want to see what's coming now. I'm done with this life. But I think that's the ultimate freedom. And I do think there will be people, maybe like me, because I'm at the moment, at least I can say I have a very big hunger for life. I want to see where this world is going. Maybe people are going to go on for some 100 years, but there won't be a forever. That is maybe even a mistake I'm sometimes making when I'm posting. It's like, oh, we want to live forever. There is no forever. Statistically, or they say like mathematically, there is always an end to something, but why not in some 100 years?
Amazing. I really want to talk about movements. And I know you're most likely friends with Brian Johnson.
Yep.
let's talk about the Don't Die movement, because I heard Brian talk and asked him a question on this, and I'm going to be in Stockholm with him quite soon for the Superhuman event. He believes that we must all come together for this Don't Die movement within the next 12 to 24 months. And the only way that all humanity is united is through Don't Die. Even live forever. There are people that don't want to live forever. But right now, in this present moment, every human doesn't want to die. But do you think he's just simply gathering what you're trying to say was the worst thing about religion in the first place?
Why does he say people have to come together? What's the sense of coming together? What does it mean?
I think it's the unity of fighting for longevity, escape velocity. And it's not just about creating therapeutics to allow people to live longer or to achieve biological immortality or longevity, escape velocity, but it's about gathering humanity together because of the potential repercussions of AI, of war, of other negatives. So it's the only thing that can unilaterally engage every single human that hasn't been done by nation states, that hasn't been done by religions, that hasn't been done by really anything.
Good question. I mean, first of all, I think in general, I would maybe then not say fight something, but more like positively like create something, because I think always when you have, again, I'm very like primed to not use negative terms, because negative terms like since the 70s, we're fighting cancer. And it didn't work out so far. And I think there is a scientific answer to that, but maybe there is even a question how we approach it with words and with thoughts and with emotions. And if you have negative, you fight something. I think this is my brain really like being primed to think like the law of attraction. If you use negative phrases and negative thoughts fighting something, you actually create more of what you fear or what you fight. But like, if we phrase it positive, like don't die, or like even like sort of live longer, I think you can create indeed a positive movement around it. I would say like, look, at the moment we need more science, but a broad like consensus or a broad societal, let's call it movement, can support that. I also think in general, but that's a broader answer, is we're going into a world where so many of other concepts, like what we work or like what we are, like getting sort of evaporated, because for example, I believe that in 10 years from now, humans won't work anymore, or at least don't have to. And while there might be people like you and me, because what we do is what we love, we might still do it. I would say 80%, or at least, I don't know how many, but like a vast majority of people are having a job which, if you would give them the choice to do something else, they would.
So you're saying 10 years is your timeline?
And that's a long one, yeah.
Okay.
It's the outcome of AI and robotics together. So we need to, in any way, on many levels, redefine who we are, what it means to be human. So I think we are in need of new unifying stories, if you want to say it like that. So I'm a very big fan of big shout out, because I don't want to steal ideas and sell it as my own. So big shout out to Yuval Harari. I'm a very big fan of his sort of ideas that the one thing which sort of is unique to humans is the ability of storytelling. And I think we're not aware of that. And I want people to be more aware that everything, or a lot of things we believe in, a lot of things actually we think are absolute or not. It's just stories we tell ourselves. Maybe nice stories, maybe bad stories, but I think we're going through a period of time where the world is changing so quickly that a lot of the stories we believed so far to be absolutely true will, in front of our very eyes, evaporate. And we are in a desperate need, because this is what we need. I think it's, again, we're craving, or we need it, is we will need to find new stories, like unifying stories. And a movement like the Don't Die movement could be one of them.
Yeah. When the Overton window, I know it's used more in a political sense, is moving so fast, how do you think that storytelling can... It's such a conundrum, right? Because there's a great... Actually, Peter Diamandis talked about this. It's technology moves much faster than society does.
Yeah.
And then he ended it by saying wisdom is needed. Like, how do you elevate the collective wisdom, or make people more aware that actually a lot of what's to come could be incredibly exciting and very liberating as well?
So over the last, let's say, how long I worked my job, like 27 years, of course, a long time. Yeah, I had the luck to meet a lot of great people. It's actually how I structured my life. So one thing is I'm very curious. So when I had my first exit, I sort of was thinking like, hey, what do I want in life? And like the two things I really came up with was like very simple, but I think very important was like, I don't want to work with assholes, or positively said, I want to work with, or just want to have nice people. I don't even work with, like, just want to have nice and great people around me. And I just want to do things which personally excite me. So all the companies we have in our portfolio, all the companies we're building, I really, really have a passion. That is sort of the one common denominator. And the same I do have for people. I really, the great thing of my job and sort of what we're doing is that I can meet fairly easily a lot of great people in politics, in science, in everything. And one thing which unfortunately worries me is that not a lot of people, and definitely not in politics, are thinking through what that enormous amount of change, which is going to be the single biggest sort of amount of change in the shortest time ever in human history. And by the way, sadly, we can go into that direction as well if you want. But like, unfortunately, if you look at human history, change is something which frightens people. And change actually usually in the last 4,000, 5,000 years always produced a negative period first, and not because of fundamental facts, but because of the negative way people react on change. It's the one I can come up with. It worries me that not more people talking about how can we sort of make sure that all the positive stuff, I truly believe AI, robotics, all of that, if sort of taken and used in the right way, can be incredibly amazing for humanity. So sort of the end state, I think, is amazing, but I think the transition and transformation period can go terribly wrong. And I think what can be at least one, hopefully, of more solutions people come up with, but the one solution I can come up with is psychedelics. Yeah, because they definitely help you to eliminate fear. And again, fear, I think, is one of the worst emotions humans can have. And there's this famous quote in Dune, the big sci-fi epos, is like that sort of fear is the mind killer. It really like brings out the worst in us. And then also everything's sort of around that fear and that change. So long story short, I think psychedelics will help us sort of, and can help humanity ease into that new world we're building. If not, I think things can also go terribly wrong.
So you are like in touch with many, many people that are going to change the world, or that are changing the world right now. And so I want to go into your crystal ball, because you probably have better insight in what the world will look like in 2030 than most humans do right now. When it comes to AI, brain-computer interfaces, psychedelics, like, what does the world look like to you?
In 2030, so 5 years from now.
Yeah.
The 5 years is pretty near term, but still, I think the amount of disruption, first of all, I think gradually, I don't think there will be anything which happens like that we wake up and have a headline, for example, oh, we stop working now. But like, I think gradually over the next 10 years, so it's going to be in full swing in 5 years from now, we're going to stop, as I said before, like at least the majority of people will stop working or work at least dramatically less. I think what we're going to do, because like for now 10,000 years, we have attached so much of our existence and our self-worth to having a job. I don't think we all going to have no job, but I think the average time people will have to sort of work in their job will decrease massively. So what I'm saying is like, maybe we then have a 2-day work week, whatever, because we won't need human labor anymore at all. I think over the next 10 years, we're going to more or less completely replace it with the combination of AI and robots, and that will be a gradual thing. But in 5 years from now, that's going to be already in full swing. So the good news is, now people might already get afraid when they hear it, because like the instinctive reaction is, but what am I without my job? Because for the last 10,000 years, we've told ourselves that's what giving us obviously money, but also self-worth, whatever. What I believe, by the way, let's answer the money question first. I think we're going to find societal agreements. This can be universal basic income. That can be that companies say, look, I pay you the same money, but like you just have to work practically 2 hours a week. And by the way, companies are already going there. Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan said in an interview, he believes that his back office and middle office, which is the ones which is touched most by AI, they can go to a 3-day work week and stuff like that. So we're gonna reduce the time, but we're gonna reinvent ourselves and need to think what we're gonna do, sort of with this new time. So a good example is, again, I really, really believe in history and like sort of looking back where we're coming from. Let's go back. Where did actually our current sort of work we come from? It comes from the time when we settled and we invented agriculture. So in the time before, and by the way, that's the shortest period of humanity. Like it's maybe like 10, 12,000 years since we became settled agriculture and sort of are used to having a job, having a 10-hour work day, like 6, 7 days, or like 5, 6 days work week, whatever. So before we were hunter-gatherers. And if you look at the few hunter-gatherer societies which are still out there, actually they just need 2 to 3 hours per day to make a living, to work. So what do they do with the rest of the day, the rest of the 22, 21 hours? They sleep, they have sex, and they tell each other stories. They are social. And actually what I believe, this is a much nicer way to be human.
Sounds like a great life.
Than what we're now, which is so used to it. Yeah. And I think AI and robotics together, and it's going to be in full swing already in 5 years, will give us back, actually, if you want to say it very emotionally loaded, will give us back our humanity and allow us to be what humans had been for, 100,000+ years before, a very social species which sits around the campfire and we tell each other stories. Now, for example, that's why we're investing so much in sports. I think people will do much more, do it, but watch it, sort of. That's why we in general invest in hotels, so we're thinking a lot actually at Pyron, how will people in the future spend the enormous amount of additional time they have, assuming that they have the same purchasing power. Again, sounds all great. My worry is if we don't sort of work on the mental level as well, although it is actually great. If I tell you now, you're like, oh my God, this is great. I think it will frighten people, at least the transition. And again, fear produces, unfortunately, regularly very bad outcomes. And psychedelics, I think, will allow people, for example, and that's, by the way, one of my other big topics, to really think, obviously, as the chairman of Atai, I have to say we're developing psychedelics for mental health issues who are defined issues like depression, anxiety. But I think we're going to suddenly define new conditions. For example, how do we help people to ease into that new paradigm where psychedelics can help, because they allow you to look at yourself, redefine, discover what do you really want to do. Again, unfortunately, I bet if we would go down to the street and ask 10 people, if I give you free money, you don't need to work, what you going to do? I think a lot of people would say, I don't know. Yeah, because one of the sad things is a lot of people don't even know themselves because they are kind of conformed since a very early day. And I think psychedelics will help people to look at themselves, look at what I believe their soul, and say, what am I really? What do I really want to do in life now? If AI and robotics give me the opportunity, and help people kind of reinvent themselves.
Peter Diamandis, actually, I asked him a question to how do you prepare your 13-year-old kid for this new paradigm shift? Do you get them to become an AI engineer or to do something else? What advice would you give to a 13, 14-year-old now about how to prepare themselves for their future, for their adulthood?
That's maybe one of the most complicated questions you've asked, because my 14-year-old godson asked me that, and I didn't have a full answer. I don't think it's become an AI engineer, because did you know that I think the number is, I don't want to say the wrong number now, but I think for the next, I don't want to say now one, it's one of the model builder who told me that one of the big AI companies told me that I think it was 99% of the sort of upgrade or improvement to their next model is already done by AI itself. So just 1% of the improvement is still done by humans, which is, by the way, also scary. We could talk about that for a long time, like about AGI. And because I'm actually, has nothing to do with anything we discussed so far, but there is, I think, a very low risk, but there is a risk. And because if it materializes, it will obviously affect all of us, like that AI goes totally wrong. But like, having said that, like that means you don't need to we don't need AI engineers, because like the last version apparently was 90% done by AI itself. Now the new version is 99% of the improvement done by AI itself. That means someone AI is completely improving itself, and maybe you need a few people, but you don't need a lot. So honestly, I think a now 13 or 14-year-old shouldn't even think anymore in what do I want to be, or at least not in the way, what do I have to be in order to make money? I think a 13 or 14-year-old should really say, how do I want to spend my time? So practically kind of, and I don't know how to better phrase it, like stop thinking in terms of jobs, because most likely till that kid is working or would work, would be in the age, like there is no work anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's more like, if I would give you all the money you need for the rest of your life, what would you do then? That's more the question. Would you be like an adventurer? Would you want to see the world? Would you want to have children? Like, it's more like, and I think it's very beautiful. It's just we're so not used to it, because we always like most of our time is centering around our jobs. Like, what is the number one question kids faced for the last hundreds of years is, what do you want to be? Or what you have to be in other cultures. And now suddenly there is these, and this is but again, what can cause the panic and the fear is it's a very sudden change, like from hundreds and maybe thousands of years where, again, children in their teens had to ask themselves, what do they want to be? Now we're like, no, you don't have to be anything, because there is nothing you have to be, because there is no need. So how do you want to live life as a human being? And I think it's beautiful, but like, I think it's so radical that no parent knows how to do that, because like it's a completely new way of living. And again, I think politics and all of them don't have answers for that, because I feel they're not even thinking about that, but I think we're gonna have to. So, but I think it's very beautiful if we don't have the fear. The good thing is young people don't have the fear. The fear is I'm more worried about the people who are already kind of in the wheel. And the older we get, the harder it is to sort of change our view radically. A 14-year-old might actually still have, because like, what do psychedelics do? I come back to psychedelics, why I think it's the solution for people older than 30 to help them ease into a new paradigm, because they give you neuroplasticity. Normally, when we talk about psychedelics, the number one thing, which is also the number one thing which is driving the healing when we talk about mental health issues, is the experience and the learning about yourself, and like the input you get while you have a so-called trip, a session. But there is a secondary effect of psychedelics, which we call increased neuroplasticity, where in a layman's term, really the days, weeks, and partially months after a trip, your brain is growing and building new connections or whatever. And that is actually, if you look at the MRI of a brain, again, the weeks and months after a psychedelic trip, that respective brain really looks like a younger brain, like we are in our 20s, which tells us like that's sort of what is the characteristics of a younger brain. You're more open for novelty. Like a 14-year-old might be much easier than we think be able to cope with all of that, because their imagination and their ability to adapt runs wild. Like, while the older we get, the more stiffer we get. So I think actually that's the good thing. And so to make the short answer is, we need to tell people, the 14-year-olds, don't think about what you want to be in terms of jobs. Think about what's your dream life? Like, suddenly people can dream again, like, which we couldn't for a long time, because most of the people had to conform.
Yeah, so powerful. And it's funny, because I was in a Starbucks yesterday. They had two 14-year-old girls. They were talking about that, I think the biology test, and it just made me think, like, so much still hasn't changed. And I sometimes worry how prepared we are as a society for what's to come. And with COVID, I think, taught us that we can get ready very quickly. But sometimes often as humanity.
Well, it had a lot of damage. I mean, we got ready quickly. I think COVID sort of showed us all the potential we have to adapt quickly or change, but also all the damage and the downside. I think a lot of the conspiracy theories and a lot of the problems we have in society also come from COVID. So COVID shows us both the upside and the downside.
I had a Peruvian shaman on the podcast recently, and he's been carrying out ceremonies of ayahuasca and San Pedro for 50 years. And he believes we're going to go through a dark period of 5 to 8 years. But after that 8 years, there's going to be real light and growing consciousness or higher consciousness as well. Would you agree with that statement?
What is it? I haven't heard it, so I can't agree with it. What is the how did he describe, or what is his more? What's the expectation for the dark 5-8 years?
He just thinks that there's going to be a lot of damage done as humanity, right? And then how he describes it, he said there's going to be a lot of blood, there's going to be a lot of war, but I don't know. That's what he said, right?
Well, it is sort of let me go back as an answer. So I don't want to agree, because I think we have an option to avoid that. But I think what he's saying is, and that's what I meant before when I said this can go terribly wrong, is like, if you look back on all the, by the way, then we have to have one more question, because I don't want to end on a depressive or on a negative thing. Again, I'm inherently optimistic, and I think we can avoid all that. But let's start with the risk, because it's important to talk about the risk and to sort of be aware what could go wrong. If you go back in history, and one of the favorite things I'm saying always, because people can do their research on their own, go back into the time 1870 to 1910. Why? By the way, you find a lot of newspapers still online, original ones, so people can really, what I'm saying now, can research it and read it themselves. The fascinating thing in that time is that the elites, which is practically us, like we're talking about, we're involved, the elites of the time were incredibly optimistic, because they just had produced 3 major innovations, which are really on the scale of sort of disruption, are comparable to what we're doing now with AI, whatever. What were these 3 major innovations? It was the telephone, it was electricity, and it was the car. And the elites of the time believed, and by the way, they were right, that these 3 innovations will completely change the world. So they were dreaming of, we're going to fly to the moon, which is eerily similar what we're doing now. With dreaming flying to Mars. They were dreaming of, there was the famous author Jules Verne, who was writing in 80 Days Around the World, but flying to the moon, and kept Nemo, the underground, or is it undersea boat. And there was the Paris World Exhibition, and the Eiffel Tower was actually a symbol for technological innovation and the dreams they had. The problem was that there were 90% of the people were farmers, and they were like, hell what? Where am I in that vision of flying to the moon, whatever? And again, what I said before, the natural reaction, unfortunately, of humans on sort of change and all of that is fear. So 90% of the people had these fear of the future. So while 10% were like, oh my God, this is going to be awesome, the 90% were like, no, wait a moment, this is not. Yeah. So Bill Clinton said it decades ago, or 20 years ago. He said people have already, and this was 20 years ago, back then, the feeling they are like in a roller coaster, and it's going faster and faster, and they screaming, get me out of here, but it's just going faster and faster. So while we can love away, what did these people do? They were seeking for answers, or they were seeking for simplified things which calm them down. And the 2 things they created, which I believe is the response to that fear, is National Socialism and Marxism. Because what are the 2 simplified answers? It's the Jews, and the other one is the rich people. Terribly wrong ideologies, but they were a direct response to the fear these people had. And then unfortunately, these 2 very, very bad, very, very inhuman ideologies created 2 world wars. And then just after these 2 world wars, we actually got the world the elites in 1870 were dreaming about. But in between, we had a carnage and around 100 million dead people. So that is sort of the negative view, maybe what this shaman is saying. Like, and unfortunately, we can go back further. Every single time humanity went through a disruption period, it usually resulted in wars, in pain, in fear, and then actually we got the positive sides of it. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think if we don't do anything, we're going to see the same again. And by the way, in maybe an even more extreme version, because it's going to be the biggest amount of disruption in the shortest period ever. So the fear level practically of people will be higher than ever before. And that's why I'm advocating. And again, my answer is psychedelics. I think there will be more answers, but like, I think we as society, politicians, whatever, we need to start saying, look, every single time humanity went through a similar, again, it was weaker back then, but so similar sort of kind of disruptions and changes for a period of time, we had what the shaman was saying. How can we avoid it this time? Again, my answer or my contribution is I think psychedelics can play a role. But there are many, many other, hopefully, things people will come up with how we can better manage the transition this time. But we have to talk about it. And if I have one worry or one plea, is like we do that too little. Like, everybody's talking like the same mistake like the people did in that period, 1870 to 1910. We're talking about how amazing, and the world will be amazing. So I am very optimistic how amazing the world will be at the end of the transition period. Too little of the people are talking about how do we manage and ease people and help people to go through the transition period. And again, we have to, because otherwise it could go really wrong.
A positive note to finish off?
Well, I think we can. Like, I truly think we're not doomed. That's my deep belief. We're not doomed to repeat the past and sort of just accept it that, oh yeah, okay, there will be shitty 10, 20 years and then the world is great. I think we can actively sort of manage the transition much better if we're paying attention to it, if we're not just paying attention. And I'm saying that very self-critical because, like, we're investing in all of the stuff which is creating that new world. And because we're doing that, I feel kind of responsible for not just to think about, okay, what's going to be amazing in 10 years, but how do I contribute to the change and to manage the transition? Again, my contribution is psychedelics.
Christian, thank you so much for it.
Thank you.
It's been great.
Yeah, it was amazing.
If you want to know what tomorrow has in store like I do, you definitely want to listen to our recent episode where I talked to Peter Diamandis about a future where we could live forever. Thank you so much.